Final Fantasy IX is one of my favorite games of all time, so I decided to make a quick little video about an iceberg image I found on the internet for it. Final Fantasy IX is a story about existential dread and stuff and, saving the world. No biggie. It's a comedic game, and even though it failed when it first came out, luckily public opinion has skyrocketed in the coming years since then. I mean, one of the favorite games of the Ghostbusters author would surely be a success. Well, without further introduction, let's get into the iceberg. The first entry in the iceberg relates to the coffee side quest, which is honestly one of the strangest side quests in any game in the Final Fantasy series. Essentially, in Disc 1 you have to go talk to Morid, the man who has the tower near the village of Dali. Upon inspecting his model of the Prima Vista, the Tantalus Troops theater ship, he tells you he'll give it to you in exchange for 3 coffees. What happens next is an incredibly difficult quest wherein you have to find all the coffee around the world, and some of it is missable. The first one being hidden near some vines at Southgate, the second being in Echo's kitchen in Madain Sari, and the final one being in the mayor's house in Dali. The tricky thing about this is the only way to get the coffee from the mayor's house in Dali is by going during the card tournament, as the mayor will be out of town. There you can check the heater to find the coffee. Otherwise, it is completely missable. Once you bring him all the coffee, he mails the Prima Vista to Zidane's house in Trino. If you try to visit him again in Disc 4, Morid is dead. At least he got to try his favorite coffee before he went. There's no way to know where the coffee is in the game or how to get it, which is what makes me revile this quest as much as I do, especially because the reward is so minimal. There's also the Doga and Une Easter egg. These are 2 items in the game called Doga's Artifact and Une's Mirror, which you can get from the Trino auction house. At first they seem to serve no real purpose in the game other than for some slight world building, I suppose. However, there's an Easter egg revolving around them. If you bring them to the Black Mage Village record player and set them there, it begins to play the song Doga and Une from Final Fantasy III. This is the first of many references to earlier Final Fantasy games that we'll be seeing here, and I think it's one of the coolest. However, much like the coffee side quest, I'm not sure how you're supposed to figure it out in the first place. Excalibur 2 is one of the most frustrating things in any video game I've ever played. So, here's the skinny. One of the weapons that Steiner can equip is Excalibur 2. In fact, it's the best weapon for him in the game. It's the best of the Night Swords. Here's the fucking catch. In order to get it, you have to play through most of the game in under 12 hours. Yeah, hell no. I've actually done this before, and it's not fun. It just gives you a little bit of extra lore and an ultra-powerful weapon, but you miss out on the core of the game for it. Don't try this challenge unless you really want to get everything out of Final Fantasy IX like I did. Kuja was almost a Trino nobleman in early development concepts for the game. You can see him in concept art portrayed as a Trino nobleman, and in the game himself, he pretends to be one for quite a bit in the story. He also has an alternate costume in Dissidia, literally called Trino Nobleman. If you keep the hammer that Lady Stella gives you after finding all the Stellazio in that side quest, there's an extra scene in the ending that features Marcus's execution at the hands of the king in the play I Want to Be Your Canary. Why this is locked behind having the hammer in your inventory is beyond me, especially because only through using the hammer can you get Steiner's ultimate armor, the tin armor. The absolute worst side quest in the game, besides collecting all the cards in Tetramaster, has to be the Nero family side quest. This side quest is so terribly signposted and so tedious that most people didn't discover it until 2013, which was 13 years after the game came out. So basically, you have to go into Memoria a certain amount, and then go back out and watch a cutscene of the Nero family meeting one of their new members, and then go back into a certain amount, then go back out and watch another cutscene. You have to run this back and forth between the final dungeon and a town fairly far away from it for 9 instances. Your reward for all this? A fucking protect ring. Something you can buy. I don't understand the point of this side quest in the slightest. It helps better establish the Nero family in the story, sure, but you do it so late in the game that there's no reason to care. Like, why should I care about the Nero family at this point? I can't find anything on Freya's age being different in the English version, though I did find that the time she spent searching for Sir Fratley has several discrepancies in the English script. She's canonically 21 in all versions, but they sometimes say that she's been searching for him for 5 years instead of 3, which would make her 23 instead of 21, as she started searching for him when she turned 18. Garnet's birth name is Sarah. This can be found from doing something with the Summoner's Wall in Medain Sari. If you read the summoning murals in the right order, it reveals her birth name. It's neat, but another really obscure thing. Final Fantasy IX is full of just obtuse bullshit for side content. Another strange side thing in this game is the blackjack minigame. On the title screen or on the end screen after you beat the game, you can play some blackjack with a computer opponent. It's fun, I guess, but I'd rather just play blackjack. Yeah, Final Fantasy IX is Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi's favorite FF game. He's said this in a few interviews. Honestly, it makes sense. It's not my favorite, but it's very well written, and I often struggle with whether or not it's my favorite. FF6 is my favorite though, no question about that.
Hey, I'm here with Hironobu Sakaguchi-san, the creator of Final Fantasy, and he has something very important to say.
I like 9, of course.
Final Fantasy IX is the best. Well, you heard it here from the man himself. So here you go. And so the debate is finally over. You heard it from the man himself. Done.
FF9 is also series composer Nobuo Uematsu's favorite FF soundtrack, and it's the last one that he worked on single-handedly. It's easy to see why he loves it so much. This is the soundtrack that has Not Alone in it. PS2 port of Final Fantasy IX that a Square Enix employee briefly thought would be interesting to experiment with due to the graphical upgrade from FF9 to FF10. However, it was never planned and never entered production. I think it would have been neat to see personally. I just love seeing reinterpretations of my favorite things. There's some early concept art for the game that shows how the game could have been different than the final version we got, and it's pretty starkly different in some ways. I think it's really fascinating to see how different things could have been. This Iceberg posits that there are unused active time events, and I'm sure there are, but I can't seem to find any information on said unused active time events anywhere. If anybody else has an idea what they might be, by all means tell me. There are several unused music tracks in the game, including one that was supposed to be the main theme and one for the Black Waltzes. Obviously these two were replaced in the game, but it's super cool to see these beta elements. Like many other PS1 era games of its time, FF9 had beta discs made of it. From my research, there isn't much known about these versions of the game online, which is a bit saddening. During a certain part of the game, the party splits into 4 to fight each of the Shrine Guardians, but you only fight one of them with Zidane and Quina. Many people have expressed wishes to have fought in all 4 of them, and as it turns out, at one point in development you were able to do so. Why this was cut is anyone's guess, though personally I think fighting the same 4 bosses twice would be pretty extraneous. Apparently during development the ending was changed 7 times, which led to there being many scrapped endings for the game. However, there isn't a lot of documentation on these, except for one that I'll be talking about later on. FF9 was originally planned to be the first in a series of spin-offs that paid homage to the original FF games. However, what we eventually got was the series' last hurrah for the classic era, in the form of a mainline game, and one of my favorite Final Fantasy games ever. I can't find any source for this, but apparently Sir Fratley was character artist Tetsuya Nomura's favorite character to design. I can't seem to find anything on this though, so it's probably bullshit. There's an unused bad ending that exists in the game, and was the one I was referring to previously when talking about all the scrapped endings. There are a few lines within the game's code that read, "The Ifa tree could not be stopped. Gaia and Terra's fusion caused global chaos, destroying many cities and taking many lives." I imagine that this ending would play out after losing to a certain boss fight, similarly to Chrono Trigger's classic "The Future Refused to Change" screen when being defeated while fighting Lavos. The unsettling beta renders refers to an early image of the characters that just creeps people out for some reason. Maybe it's the fact that they all look so angry? I can't tell you. There's something definitely odd about it though. At the end of the game, Vivi has a bunch of kids who appear as identical versions of him. That's really all there is to this. For separate ending dialogue between Zidane and Garnet, I couldn't find much. There are some threads that purport that the NTSC and PAL versions have different dialogues for the ending scene between the two of them, but I can't find any evidence of them, as both games seem to have identical scripts. I also can't find any documentation of it. Vivi was originally going to be a fighter in Dissidia NT. Why he wasn't chosen, I don't know, but I love that he was considered, and I really wish he was added. He's one of my favorite characters in any game, and would probably be my main if I played Dissidia NT. Apparently, the developers of the game want to continue the story of Final Fantasy IX. I mean, I don't really think it would be a good idea. The ending was pretty conclusive to the themes and stuff, especially because this game works great as a conclusion to the first 10 years of Final Fantasy as a whole. I really don't think a sequel would be a good idea, but maybe that's the route the animated series will take. Freya and Fratley were in fact exiled by the king of Burmecia, and that's why you see neither of them affiliated with the nation in the events of the game anymore, instead as wandering nomads. Vivi died in the ending. As was stated during the game, Vivi was made with a 1-year lifespan, and he already lived 6 months of it by the beginning of the game. Naturally, as the epilogue takes place a year after Zidane goes missing in the Ifa tree, Vivi is very much dead at this point. There are rumors that the game was originally going to go with a more realistic art style before settling on the chibi one it has. I personally really like the art style in this game, so I don't mind at all the change. I do want to see what a realistic version of the game would look like though, if only for the fun of it. Apparently, much like FF8, Square Enix lost the source code for FF9 in its entirety at one point. God, I just find this so funny. How do you lose the source code for an entire game like that? That's just so ridiculously unprofessional. In original story drafts of FF9, Steiner and Beatrix were going to be the same character. However, they were split into 2 characters, and I think they explore 2 versions of the same character in an interesting way. Beatrix is Steiner if he was never forced outside of Alexandria. FF9 has several connections to FF1, seeing as it's the last hurrah for the series. There's the crystals coming back, one of the main villains is named Garland, like the main villain in FF1. Garnet's birth name is Sarah, like the princess from FF1. The 4 fiends make a return when they take their forms from FF1, and the main party, Zidane, Vivi, Steiner, Garnet, is reminiscent of the classic FF1 party: Thief, Black Mage, Fighter, White Mage. Steiner is a war orphan. This is true. This is canon. This is not a fan theory. At the end of a war in 1771, Steiner lost both his parents and was orphaned as a child. This led to him becoming dedicated to his training so he could become a knight. This is never revealed in game. It's in like one of the Ultimania books, but I think it should have been. Beatrix was corrupted by the mist. I'm sure she was in some capacity. The mist seems to corrupt everyone it touches. That's probably why she never rescinded her loyalty from Queen Brahne, even though she recognized Queen Brahne was kind of committing genocide. Burmecians don't have fur. Yep, they just don't have fur. They are rodent-like in nature, but have no fur, just smooth skin. It's a pretty odd thing to think about. Apparently there were character-specific questlines that were scrapped from the game. Sadly, they weren't in the final game, but I would have loved it if they were. These kinds of questlines have always been cool for me. Freya is the only female in Burmecia's military. This one is very self-explanatory. In canon, she's the only member of the Burmecian military who's a girl, that we know of course. Freya and Fratley have a 4-year age difference. He's 25 and she's 21. It's not a terrible age gap right now, but when they fell in love, she would have been 16 and he would have been 20, which is not good. I am not a fan. Immortal Burmecian soldier obviously refers to the eternal Burmecian soldier Dan from the raid on Burmecia. He is the most powerful character in the entire game, and he has surpassed the need for mortality. But seriously, I don't know what this refers to. Unused Desert Palace death scenes. If you fail in the game as Frogsid, you just get a game over screen in the original game. However, through modding the game, people have found that there were originally unique death scenes for each party member in this scene after you fail as Sid. Why they were cut is no idea, because they are completely finished and I think they're very cool. Ruby might be a drag queen. This refers to how early in development Ruby, the only female member of the Tantalus troupe, was actually planned to be a drag queen, and in the final game it's unclear. I'm just going to file it under canon for now because I like the idea. I mean, in old performance troupes, oftentimes men would play female roles as actors because they didn't see women as good at performing. So it seems like it fits the time. Although the 1770s is a little late for that. Disc 3 skip. I can't find any proof of this glitch existing, though some people might want to skip Disc 3 because of how drastic a departure from the rest of the story it is. I personally think a lot of it is brilliant, so I won't want to skip it at all, but whatever. Sir Fratley's amnesia being an act is a popular fan theory, and I think there's a bit of credibility to the idea that he might just see Freya as a regret in his past and thus doesn't want to acknowledge her. I mean, considering what I revealed about the age gap, yeah, I'd probably want to forget doing something so messed up too. Finally, Vivi's soul controls Gaia's life flow. Now this sounds absolutely absurd, but there actually is some weight to this. In Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia, this mobile game where characters from various Final Fantasy games are put into another world, Vivi is one of the characters, and he wants to stay in this other world, but he says if he does, Gaia's life flow will stop, which means that Vivi's soul controls the life flow of the planet Gaia. And that was the entire Final Fantasy IX Iceberg. It was alright. You can tell the person who made it definitely really likes Freya. Thank you all for watching. This has been Arcade Everlasting, Immortal Doll, signing off.